Hello, everyone. This is Chapter 3 of The Labyrinth, special edition, out on my balcony in the rain. Chapter 3, Pipsqueak. Sarah felt herself toppling forward into the darkness. Only by swinging her arms wildly did she manage to keep her balance. The hillside was very steep. Her mouth had gone dry with fright. Carefully, she sat down. That felt safer, but she could not afford to sit there long, with only 13 hours to get through the labyrinth and find Toby in the castle. She tried slithering down the hillside on her bottom, but that was no good either. Rocks and little shrubs impeded her, and she dared not stand up to get past them. It was so black. She might have been trying to find her way through a sea of ink. She felt tears rising, but blinked them away. She would do it. There were no limits to what she could do, given the determination, which she certainly had, and the ingenuity, which she had never lacked yet, admittedly, in more humdrum predicaments. And maybe a little luck, which she deserved, didn't she? She would do it, she vowed, as she sat on the black hillside with no idea how to move another foot. High above her, where the owl had flown, she heard a lark sing. She peered up at it, and by taking her eyes off the blackness below, she became aware that a hint of light was staining the rim of the dark sky. She watched the light grow brighter, changing from red to pink, and then pale blue. And when she saw the edge of the sun inch up over the horizon, she shut her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt the sun warming her skin. She would do it. When she opened her eyes again, Jareth's castle was shining before her, its spires and turrets rimmed with reflective sunlight. Anxiously, she scrutinized the valley, which, like developing a photograph, took longer to reveal itself. The first thing she could gauge was its width. The extent of the land between herself and the castle was not so great. I can run that far in a couple of hours, she reckoned. It's only a few miles. Jareth was trying to hoax me. He thought I wouldn't be too scared in the darkness. I would give up and forget about Toby. How could I? In 13 hours I can be there and back with time to spare. She wondered if 13 hours in Jareth land would take the same time to pass at home. If so, would her father and stepmother think when they returned? What would? They would probably call the police. Well, there was nothing she could do about that. She did expect to find a telephone. She did not expect to find a telephone in Jareth's castle. She smiled wanly. The sun was above the horizon, and color and shape were seeping into the valley. There was an awful lot of stuff down there. She could tell that much. She went on watching, and gradually she took in the full nature of the valley. At first, she could not believe it. As the sun rose higher and disclosed more to her, her shoulders dropped, and her face lost its smile. She shook her head slowly, dumbfounded. From the foot of the hillside where she sat to the castle and beyond it, from horizon on each side, there stretched a vast, intricate maze of walls and hedges. The labyrinth, she whispered. So that is the labyrinth. She studied it, trying to decipher some pattern to it, some principle of design that might guide her through it. She could see none. Corridors doubled and wound and coiled. Gateways led to gateways, to gateways. It reminded her of thousands of fingerprints laid side by side, overlapping each other. Did someone work all that out, she wondered? Or had it just happened? The impossibility of ever finding her way through the labyrinth started to overwhelm her. She stood up, clenching her fists, set her jaw, and cleared her throat. Well, she said, here we go. Come on, feet. In the dawning light, she could see her path that zigzagged in the hillside. She picked her way through it, through the rocks and shrubs. At the foot of the path came a great wall, strengthened with a buttress. It stretched as far as she could see to the left and right. Doubtfully, she approached the wall with no idea what she might do when she reached it. As she got closer, a movement just at the base of it caught her eye. There was a little man. He was cackling as he ground something underfoot. Excuse me, Sarah said. The little man nearly jumped out of his skin. Just going, he said. before he even had turned around to look to see who it was. When he did turn, he had his face down so that he regarded her from under his thick, bushy eyebrows. "Well," he exclaimed, looking crossed and astonished at the same time. Well, it seems that he had never before set eyes on a person like Sarah. Or perhaps that it was no person like Sarah had ever caught him unawares. "Well," he said again. "We'll never get anywhere like this," Sarah thought. He was a, an odd little person. His sprouting eyebrows clearly wanted to be fierce, but his wrinkled face couldn't live up to that ferocity. His expression was wary now, not particularly friendly, but not hostile either. He seemed to be avoiding her eyes, and she noticed when she moved her hands, his gaze would follow them. On top of his head, he wore a skull cap. From the belt that held his breeches up, he had a chain of ornaments dangling, costume jewelry as far as she could tell. She saw his mouth moving to say, "Well," again, and interrupted quickly. "Excuse me, but I have to go to the labyrinth. Can you show me the way in?" His mouth froze in a formation of a W. He blinked at her once or twice, then his eyes darted to one side. He rushed a few steps towards the bluebell, at the same time pulling a spray can from under his jacket. As he aimed the spray, Sarah saw that a diaphanous little fairy was emerging from the bluebell. He sprayed it with a couple of quick bursts. The fairy at once wilted, just like a shriveled petal. 57, he said with some satisfaction. Sarah was shocked. "Oh, how could you?" he answered with a grunt. She ran to where the fairy was lying on the ground, wings quivering and shivering. "Poor thing!" she exclaimed. She picked it gently up with her fingertips and turned it accusingly to the fairy slayer. "You monster!" She felt a sharp pain as if from broken glass. The fairy had bitten her finger. "Oh!" Sarah dropped the fairy and sucked her finger in her mouth. "It bit me!" she muttered around her finger. "Of course she did," the little man chuckled. "What do you expect fairies to do?" I Sarah was frowning, perplexed. I thought they did, well, nice things like granting wishes." "Ha!" His eyebrows went up and he chortled. "Shows what you know then, don't it?" He raised his spray can and casually hit another bluebell with it. A second shimmering fairy fell down, turning brown like a leaf in autumn. 58, he said, and shook his head. "They breed as fast as I spray." Sarah was wincing as she sucked her finger. "Oh," she complained, "it hurts." She took her finger from her mouth and shook it. He walked to a plant nearly as tall as he was, tore off one of its broad, grayish leaves, and handed it to her. "Here," he told her, "rub that on it." She gratefully did what he told her to. No sooner as she started rubbing that she dropped the leaf, clasped her finger with her other hand, and hopped around in pain. "Ow!" she shouted. "That makes it worse, much worse. Ow!" He was holding his sides with his pudgy little hands and roaring with laughter. "Course it do. Fancy rubbing one of them on a fairy bite. You don't know nothing, do you?" Her face screwed up with pain. Sarah answered indignantly, "I thought you were giving it to me to make it better." "Oh, oh." "You thought that, didn't you? You've got a lot of opinions," he chuckled. "All of them wrong. And you've got grass all over the seat of your trousers." In spite of the pain in her finger, she had to glance over her shoulder, and she thought that he was right. It was from sliding down the hillside. Brushing off what she could, she realized that he was paying her back for having caught him unawares. "You're horrible," she told him. "No, I'm not." He sounded surprised. "I'm Hoggle. Who are you?" "Sarah." He nodded. "That's what I thought." Spotting another fairy, he squirted her. To make sure, he stepped on this one and ground his foot around. The fairy squealed. 59, Hoggle said. Sarah was thinking, still sucking her finger. She seemed to know about her, so he must have had something to do with Jareth, mustn't he? Some kind of spy, maybe? Well, maybe. Yet, he was not her idea of a spy. Spies weren't grumpy. They didn't play mean tricks on you, did they? If all of her opinions were wrong, supposing he was a spy, then it must be his job to persuade me that all of my opinions are wrong, and they are really all correct. And if they are correct, he is not a spy. But that would mean that he had no move for persuading me that I'm wrong about everything, so probably I am wrong about this too. And so supposing he is a spy. Oh, she exclaimed in exasperation. It was like one of those drawings she had seen in a book at home where the water seemed to be flowing uphill, and yet you can never put a finger on just where the drawing is telling you a lie. Hoggle tore a leaf from a plant and offered it to her with a sort of twinkling scowl on his face. She took her finger from her mouth. The pain was easing now. She shook her head and had to smile a little at that funny, wizened face of his. His expression, in answer, went dark again. He looked at her mistrustfully. He was not used to being smiled at. Well, she thought, there's nothing else to do. Whether or not he was there to spy on me, he's the only person I can ask for help. So she tried. Do you know where the door to the labyrinth is? She screwed it. He screwed up his face. Maybe. All right, where is it? Instead of replying, he dodged to one side, raising his spray can. 60. I said, where is it? Where's what? The door. What door? The door into the labyrinth. The door into the labyrinth? Oh, that's a good one, he laughed, not kindly. Sarah wanted to punch him. It's hopeless asking you anything. Not if you ask the right questions. He was giving her a sidelong look. You're as green as a cucumber. Well, what are the right questions? Hoggle stroked the top of his nose. It depends on what you want to know. That's easy. How do I get into the labyrinth? Hoggle sniffed and his eyes twinkled. Ah, that's more like it. She thought she heard music in the air again, the magic music that had hummed around the Goblin King. You get in there, he nodded, indicating behind her. You got to ask the right questions if you want to get anywhere in the labyrinth. Sarah had spun around. Now, the great wall, she saw a huge, grotesquely designed gate. She stared at it, almost accusingly. She could have sworn it had not been there before. There ain't no door, see? Hoggle was explaining. All you gotta do now is find the key. She looked back at him and then all around her. She saw that at once it was going to be no problem to find the key. Near her was a very small mat, and from each end an enormous key was sticking out. Well, she said, that's simple enough. She went over to the key and tried to pick it up. She could just manage to get on one end of the ground or the other, but the key was too heavy for her to lift up to the keyhole at the gate. She stared at Hoggle. I suppose it's too much to expect you to give me a hand? Yes, Hoggle said. She tried again, straining to lift it. It was hopeless. Oh, she said, this is stupid. You mean you're so stupid, Hoggle corrected her. Shut up, you rotten little pipsqueak. Don't call me that, Hoggle was agitated. I am not a pipsqueak. Yes, you are, Sarah said. She was uneasily reminded of herself as much as a younger age at school, chanting cruel jibes of some tormented girl, but she persisted. Yes, you are, rotten little napsty, ugly pipsqueak. Hoggle was beside himself with rage. Don't call me that, he said hysterically. You're stupid, you are. You take everything for granted. Pipsqueak, pipsqueak. I'm not. Stop it, nasty, creepy little pipsqueak. Hoggle corrected himself with some dignity and told her, if you weren't so brainless, you'd try the gate. That stopped her short. She thought for a moment, went to the gate, and gave it a little push. It swung open. Very clever. You think you're so clever, Hoggle said. You know why? Because you ain't learned nothing. Sarah was peering cautiously inside the gate. She did not like what she saw. It was dark and foreboding in there. The music humming in the air seemed to be more intense. There was a smell of things rotting. She gathered her courage and took 2 steps inside the labyrinth. Then she stopped short. A passageway ran across the entrance. It was so narrow and the wall so high that the sky was a mere slit over her head. In the gloom, she heard a continual drip of water echoing. She approached the farther wall, touched it, and pulled her hand away. It was dark and slimy like mildew. Hoggle's head was poking through the gateway behind her. Cozy, ain't it? Sarah shrugged. Hoggle's manner had altered. He was quiet. It was almost possible to detect a hint of concern in his voice. You're really going to go in there, are you? Sarah hesitated. Yes, she said. Yes, I am. Is there a reason why I shouldn't? She was clenching her fists. It did seem such a dreadfully gloomy place inside the gate. There's every reason why you shouldn't, Hoggle replied. Is there any reason you should? Any really good reason? Yes, there is, she paused. So I suppose I must. All right, Hoggle said, in a tone of voice that implied, on your head be it. Now, he asked, which way will you go? Right or left? She looked one way and then the other. There was no reason to choose either one or the other. Both looked grim. The brick walls appeared to extend to infinity. She shrugged, wanting some help, but too proud to ask for it. They both look the same, she said. Well, Hoggle told her, you're not going to get very far then, are you? All right, she said crossly. Which way would you go? Me, he laughed without mirth. I would go neither way. Some guide you are. I never said I was a guide, did I? Although you could certainly use one. You'll probably end up back where you started, giving your record for being wrong. Sarah snapped at him. If that's all the help you're going to be, you might as well let me get on with it. You know what's your problem? Hoggle asked. She took no notice, but tried to look determined to set in one direction or the other. Left, right, she was thinking. That was the normal order. So in this abnormal place, she might as well try going to the right, might she? I told you. You take too many things for granted, Hoggle went on. This labyrinth, for instance, if you were trying to get to the center, which is extremely doubtful, you'll never get out again. Well, that's your opinion. Sarah moved to her right. Well, it's a better opinion than any of yours. Thanks for nothing, Hogwarts. Hoggle! His voice came echoing from the gateway, where she remained. And don't say I didn't warn you. Her jaw set, she strode out between the damp and dire walls. She had gone only a few strides when a mighty, reverberating clang, the gates closed behind her. She stopped, and she could not resist returning to see if the gates would open again. It wouldn't. Hoggle was shut outside. The only sounds in the labyrinth now were the drip of water and Sarah's quick breathing.